Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wolfe here, and in this video we are going to continue exploring how our bodies work, how our different body systems are interacting with one another to keep us alive. We're going to finish up with the circulatory system today, and then we're also going to introduce the respiratory system, so when we're breathing, for instance. But before we do that, let's go over the warm-up you all just worked on. So I'm going to click slideshow and let's get started. All right, so describe the law of diffusion using the following terms. All right, this is a really important concept that's going to apply to all the systems we talk about. So we could say something like this. Molecules will diffuse, which essentially means that they move, spread out from a high concentration always to a low concentration until they've evened out, until they've reached equilibrium. So hopefully you had some type of answer similar to this. But we always go from a high to low concentration until equilibrium's met. All right, now then going over some of the parts of the circulatory system that we introduced yesterday. All right, we could use the term artery, capillary, or veins. Here it looks like I have a blood vessel. It looks kind of big, but if you look at it, there's just red blood cells going like single file, which means that this is actually really small. Also notice that we have these arrows of like oxygen coming out, nutrients coming out, carbon dioxide getting picked up, waste getting picked up. Okay, so if I have a small blood vessel, and it's where things are being exchanged, that is always going to be the capillary. All right. And then here I have a heart, and it looks like I have these arrows pointing away from the heart. So if it's going away from the heart, that's going to be an artery. Away from the heart, an artery. And then here I have another image, and my blood vessels it looks like I have arrows coming towards the heart, and they're blue. Now they're not actually blue, but you'll always see arteries are red and veins are going to be blue in just body diagrams, and so that's going to be veins. All right. Now, what's the purpose of a capillary? We had mentioned it before. It's to drop off nutrients and to pick up waste. The purpose of artery is to carry blood from the heart, and the purpose of veins is to carry blood back to the heart. All right. So remember, you should have watched this video too. I think it gives a really cool introduction of just how we breathe in oxygen and how it gets delivered to our cells. The other thing I really like about this video is how many different systems are involved and interacting to keep you alive. All right, so let's continue with the circulatory system. So this should be on page 7, I believe. And let's go on to the heart. So the heart's really just a pump, all right? And its goal is to pump blood throughout your body. Now let's get a little bit more specific. All right, actually before we do that though, let's watch this link right here. Really quickly, just as a forewarning, some people find this a little bit gross. It's going to be a beating heart from a heart transplant, and they hook it up to a machine because it needs to keep on beating to stay fresh before it gets transplanted into another person. So some of you might think it's gross, but I think that this is incredibly just fascinating, and then also that we can use this technology to save lives. So right there is a real human heart. And they're going to hook it up to this machine that essentially just is almost like these pipes. And it has these electrical signals that allow the heart to pump. But that is what a heart looks like when it's pumping. I just always think that that's so cool. All right, so we're going to go back now. And all right, so we have two different sides of the heart, and you're going to see in your notes, you're going to have a page like this, right? But the right side of the heart, its goal is to pump blood to the lungs to get rid of CO2 and to pick up oxygen. And you might be thinking, well, all right, so that's this side, right? That's the right side. No, it's your right side, right? So even though we're looking at this heart, the right side of the heart is actually right here. And then the left side of the heart, its goal is to pump blood to all the organs and other tissues of your body. And that's that side of the heart right here. All right. So let's actually trace the path of blood as it comes to your heart. All right. So first what's going to happen, and I want you to actually draw this too. If you have the colored utensils, awesome for this. But blue is going to represent deoxygenated blood. So that comes into the heart right here through these veins. All right. And then it's going to go into this chamber. It's called an atria. And then it goes into this other chamber called a ventricle. And when your heart pumps, it's going to push that blood out to your lungs. And then the blood vessels actually will turn into capillaries, and then they'll come back to larger blood vessels. But in the lungs, they're capillaries, and it's here that they're going to pick up oxygen. So notice the path of the blood. It's blue, and then it turns to red. So in here, all right, in the capillaries of the lungs, that blood picked up oxygen. So now I have oxygenated blood. All right, so the right side of the heart's job to pump blood to the lungs, so return to pick up oxygen, and then it returns back to the heart. So now notice that I'm on the left side of the heart now. Remember, even though this is the right, it's your left. So the left side pumps blood to all the other organs and tissues of the body. All right, and so blood's gonna come into this chamber. Now you may have you've probably heard of heart pumping before. It's kind of like lub dub. So what is that? The lub is blood's going to collect right here. It's called the atrium. And so that lub is when blood gets pumped into this lower part right here called the ventricle. And then that dub is the stronger contraction. And that's really going to pump all the blood out to the rest of your body. It does the same thing here. All right. So that lub is blood from here to here. And then the dub is blood out of the heart. All right. So lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. All right, so that's the circulatory system. Now we're going to move on to the respiratory system. And they're really, really intertwined because we already talked about the respiratory system right here, your lungs. But let's delve a little bit more specifically into the respiratory system. So the function of the respiratory system is to carry out gas exchange, right? To bring in oxygen into your body and to expel CO2. All right, so here's some important parts of it. Is you obviously breathe in through your mouth and then through your nose, right? They both lead to the same airway passage right here, and then they're going to lead to your trachea. And you could actually, you notice how the trachea have these lines right here? That's actually cartilage, and you could feel that, right? If you kind of go like this, that's your windpipe, that's your trachea, right? And it's kind of, it's harder. That's the cartilage. It prevents it from collapsing. You don't want your airways to collapse. And your esophagus, where you swallow food, is actually behind your trachea. You can't feel that. All right. So then that trachea is going to separate into these two branches right here. All right, those are called bronchi. It's kind of a Latin fancy way to say branches in a way. And so if you've ever had bronchitis, it's kind of like this cough. You could really feel in your lungs. That means this area is infected right here. And then it keeps on separating and separating, right? Until it eventually, all right, forms these almost like tiny balloons, microscopic balloons at the very tips, at the very end right here, all right? And this is where gas exchange happens. These tiny balloons, microscopic balloons, those are called alveoli, all right? So this is where the gas exchange happens, all right? Now, I know that this, even though we kind of have this diagram where it's like, hey, here's a lung, and if we kind of zoom in here, we have like the alveoli, the balloons, and if we zoom in even further, right, we get really small at the microscopic level. It looks like I have to keep on going to show that, right? But what I want to do is actually show a video of all this because I think it makes way more sense when we actually see it in a 3D animation. All right. And I'm going to narrate this. So I'm going to turn off the volume right here. So here's a person, right? And what they're going to zoom in on first is your diaphragm. So see this? Yeah, it's pointing to it right here. That's your diaphragm. Whenever you breathe in or out, that's a muscle. All right, that when it pulls down, that's when you're breathing in. So that means my diaphragm pulled down. When it goes back up, that means I'm breathing out. All right, so that's the muscle that's actually going to allow your lungs to expand and contract, to breathe in, to breathe out. Now the animation is getting a little bit more detailed. You have these two lungs, and they are separated into these different parts, but we don't need to worry about that. But this is the bronchi we talked about, right? And then the trachea. And the trachea has these cartilage on the outside that prevents it from collapsing. And you could actually feel it, right? And then we go to the mouth. And so let's say a person's breathing in. So these blue molecules right here, those are going to be oxygen. Kind of wish they were red. But anyways, that's the oxygen in this video. It's going to go down your trachea. It's going to separate into the bronchi. All right, and those bronchi are going to separate into even smaller tubes and to smaller tubes. And so now we're getting into the microscopic level. You could not see this with the naked eye, all right? Until finally these end at these microscopic sacs, these microscopic balloons, and notice that they are covered with capillaries, with blood vessels, right? They are just completely wrapped, blood vessels are completely wrapped around. So here, notice the blue oxygen right here, right, in the alveoli, in the lungs. And then we have red blood cells coming by, right outside, and the oxygen, right, is going to diffuse, right? We've been talking about diffusion. The oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the bloodstream, and it gets picked up by a red blood cell. Now, the red blood cell actually doesn't turn from blue to red like this animation will show, but it's just a way to show, kind of like what we did in our drawing, that the red means it's been oxygenated. Now, see these kind of gray dots right here? Though that's carbon dioxide, right? So that's what your cells used from cellular respiration. They got to get rid of it. And there's a lot in your bloodstream. So those diffuse out of your bloodstream into your lungs. This process is happening at the same time. Oxygen's going into your blood. CO2 is going out of your blood into your lungs. And so when you breathe out, that CO2 now travels the same way oxygen traveled, just in the opposite direction. So through these tiny tubes, right? Back into the bronchi, back out the trachea, back through your nose or mouth, all right? So this took a while to explain, right? But every time you breathe in or out, in and out, which is pretty frequently, right? This process is happening every single time. All right. So hopefully that gives a little bit more of a visual of the respiratory system. Ooh, I like that I paused it right here. So see these things right here, the alveoli? They're actually even smaller than this. This was just for the animation, but we could see all these tiny balloons. That's where the gas exchange actually occurs. So let's go back to the notes now. All right. So just to make sure that we finish up our notes, the alveoli, these are the microscopic air sacs. They're surrounded by capillaries. It's where gas exchange occurs. And why does this happen? Like, why don't we just have a giant, why isn't our lungs just all air, right? And that's it. And here's the reason, is that diffusion can only happen, all right, over a very short or small area, all right? So we want to increase the surface area at which things could diffuse in, all right? And so by having these tiny sacs, we're increasing the amount of surface where oxygen could go in and carbon dioxide could go out, right? Without that, there just wouldn't be enough surface area for that gas exchange to occur, all right? With alveoli, lungs have a surface area of a tennis court, all right? So if we were to look at all this, the surface available for gas exchange, it's the size of a tennis court in your lungs. All right. So let's actually look at what's happening in the alveoli between oxygen and carbon dioxide, and let's look at it a little bit more detailed. Before we do that, I want to show this, just a snippet of this video. I think it really does a good job at, like, this stuff could seem really complicated, but in terms of what's happening, it's really simple. It's diffusion in terms of things going from a high to low concentration. So let's look at an example in this video.
The natural movement of molecules from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration. Did you know that diffusion happens in our body, allowing for life functions that keep us alive? Let's take a look at some examples of diffusion in the human body. When you inhale, your lungs become highly concentrated with oxygen molecules.
Now remember, this is a simplified version. Your lungs aren't just empty spaces. They're filled with those alveoli, but this is just for simplification purposes.
Does the oxygen get to the rest of your body? Well, the lungs are connected to blood vessels, and diffusion allows oxygen to enter the blood. Let's use this diagram to better see what's going on. The lungs have a higher concentration of oxygen than the surrounding blood. Some of the oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream. The oxygen is picked up by red blood cells and transported to the rest of the body.
All right. So this is something I used to always wonder. I was like, okay, you breathe in, but how does your body, how does the oxygen know to go to your bloodstream, for instance? All right. And it's all because of the law of diffusion. If you have a high concentration of oxygen in your lungs, low concentration in the bloodstream, oxygen will just automatically move and spread out so it fills up the blood as well. All right. So with that simplified version of mine, we're going to do the exact same thing. It's just going to look a little bit more complicated because we're going to look at some actual structures of the lungs, things like that.